Hello, my name is Alec, tiljoe, I'm switching Gitsan and hereditary people, and I'm with switching side. I speak publicly for indigenous rights and rights of other minorities. I plan to go to university for indigenous studies, political science, and move on to law, as well as continue my speaking and over time become a politician. That's my dream. This is my documentary on indigenous violence, and first I'm going to be interviewing myself. If you hear random noises in the background, it's probably my 10 animals, so please ignore it. First question. Have ever experienced first or second-hand indigenous violence, including missing, murder, indigenous women, sex trafficking, human trafficking, indigenous police brutality, being targeted for essay or attack for being indigenous? Firsthand, I was targeted for rape when I was 3 years old because I was an indigenous young child, and he didn't think that the police would do anything, which they didn't. He killed himself years later because of guilt and stalking us for years. Secondhand, I have had many childhood best friends and people that I knew that went missing and became another unsolved missing and murdered indigenous case that were hardly even looked into. And that to me is a genocide in itself, and it's fucking disgusting. I know many people that are close to me that have experienced indigenous police brutality and are now horrified of cops. With that question, how did that make me feel, and what can people or the government do to help with this issue? It was later on in my life when I was able to understand what happened to me. I was revolted by his actions, his family trying to cover it up, my family not believing me, my mom and my dad did, but most of all was Vancouver PD. The case went from New West to Vancouver PD because they had the resources. They showed up to our house Christmas morning saying that they weren't going to pursue with my case. My mom told them to leave. I wish that even though, yes, because of what he did to me, the stalking and the guilt, he killed himself, that the police take things like that seriously. Other people's attackers don't feel so bad that they kill themselves. I have other attackers, other people that raped, abused, and hurt me in so many ways, and the police won't even give me a restraining order. Some people have to see them, look at them in their face. Those people need to be locked up and stay locked up. The police need to be better with these cases. Make people feel more comfortable, so come forward, and these people will be locked up, stay locked up, where they belong. Second question. How could people, law enforcement, or the government prevent this attack? I don't know much about my attacker since everyone is very hush-hush. I don't know if he had done it before, etc. So there was no way to prevent my attack since he was so close to my family and they trusted him. But I will never let anyone alone with my children. My first attack was done in the early 2000s. Police wouldn't take it seriously. But a lot of people I know, it's someone who's a serial raper or essayer. A lot of people I've met have had them and other family members essayed or raped by the same person. And they need to be locked up the first time before it happens to someone else, which it normally does. 13 to 20% of sexual offenders may reoffend in 5 years. That is documented, went to court, tried, and found guilty of a sexual charge. And they become a sexual offender, registered. Not undocumented, which is most of sexual offenses. With the second question, in a dream world, how would I expect this attack to be dealt with? What would have law enforcement done to bring justice to this attack? In a dream world, people who commit such attacks serve the longest fucking sentence possible, especially if there's a children involved. They go to a mental hospital for the rest of their life after serving, so 1, they can't hurt any more children. 2, if you hurt a child like that, you deserve it and you know what you're doing. And 3, if you hurt a child like that, you are beyond sick in the head. If you are a child rapist, then the max amount of time, probation after serving, you can't live in the same state or province of the person that you attacked. And they, the victim, gets an automatic restraining order. If you reoffend, bitch, it's life. Third question, how does indigenous violence affect indigenous people as a whole? Indigenous violence affects indigenous people as a whole since it leads to a breakdown of social structure, increased trauma, and loss of cultural identity. Indigenous violence, including missing, murder, indigenous women, sex trafficking, human trafficking, police brutality, and targeted attacks, has a devastating effect on indigenous communities. These forms of violence contribute to a pervasive sense of insecurity and fear, which can disrupt a community and trust. The loss of individuals, particularly women and children, not only affects the families, but also weakens the cultural fabric of the community. The trauma associated with these violent attacks can also lead to long-term psychological impacts, including anxiety, depression, and intergenerational trauma. The violence often implicates existing social issues, such as poverty, lack of access to resources, making it difficult for communities to heal and rebuild. The systematic nature of these issues also highlights the ongoing marginalization of indigenous people, leading to calls for justice and reformation that are often met with resilience. Overall, the effects of such violence are profound, affecting not only the individuals directly involved, but the entire community's well-being and future. With that question, do I think indigenous violence is connected to residential schools, or do I think when the doors closed to those schools that they ended the genocide? Or has it continued in residential schools just to start? I personally believe that indigenous people's genocide started almost the moment that Christopher Columbus set foot on our land. For example, the Trail of Tears in 1830, where thousands of Native Americans, particularly the Cherokee, were forcibly relocated from their ancestral land, resulting in significant death and suffering, as well as the widespread violence and massacre, such as the Sand Creek Massacre in 1866 and the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890, where indigenous people were killed by U.S. military forces. Yes, I do believe that indigenous violence is connected to residential schools, and no, I do not think that when the doors closed to those schools that they ended the genocide. They've started doing it behind closed doors. For example, missing and murdered indigenous women, doing nothing to find them and bring them home, environmental destruction, and state violence. Fourth question. If I was in residential schools or day schools, what did I experience there? What was that like? What do I want people to know about residential schools or day schools? I'm very lucky and grateful to not have gone to residential schools nor day schools, but I'm well educated and I know what they have experienced. Indigenous people that went to residential schools or day schools experienced things that you couldn't even imagine. Depending on where you were, it was different. But almost every indigenous person that attended such schools experienced forced assimilation, separation from families, where they are ripped from their homes, abuse and neglect. Reports of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse were rampant in residential schools. Children faced harsh punishment, neglect, and maltreatment, leading to significant trauma, cultural erasure. The schools aimed to erase indigenous culture, resulting in loss of cultural identity for many. Children were punished for participating in their traditions or speaking their language. Poor living conditions. Residential schools were overcrowded, poorly maintained, with inadequate food, sanitation, and healthcare, leading to poor health outcomes. The psychological impact. The trauma endured by children in these institutions has lasting effects contributing to mental health issues, physical health issues, and intergenerational trauma within Indigenous communities. To have an understanding of what these schools were like, I suggest looking into it, since it is Canada's history. A good movie or book I recommend to almost everyone is Indian Horse. It depicts what it is like to go through and deal with these kinds of trauma. Not to mention, there are reports of horrific SA, rape, and abuse, etc. Many survivors have shared accounts of sexual abuse by staff members, including priests, nuns, and other educators. These reports indicate that the abuse was not isolated but rather systematic. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, documented thousands of testaments from survivors, which many included harrowing details of sexual and physical abuse. The Commission's findings revealed a pattern of neglect abuse that was prevalent across many, if not all, residential schools. Certain institutions, such as St. Anne's Indian Residential Schools in Ontario, have been particularly notorious for the abuse that occurred. Reports of survivors detail horrific experiences of sexual and physical violence at this school, such as documents that revealed stories of children being locked in the school's basement for days, being forced to wear soiled underwear on their heads for hours, being forced to eat their own vomit. Staff used metal-fashioned whips for corporal punishment. The most shocking account that emerged was the homemade electric chair to punish children, often for the amusement of the staff working at the school. When they would put children in an electric chair, it was often administered in front of other children. May Tuan, I think that's his name, sorry if I got that wrong, remembers his own experience. I held the arms of the chair as hard as I could. I looked at Brother Golet's hand as he turned the handle. I felt a jolt of pain running from my hands to my legs. I gasped. I tried to pull my arms free. I couldn't. I felt my legs waving in front of me. The pain intensified, then lessened, like falling through ice. I wiggled this way and that. My teeth snapped together. My eyes closed. I didn't want anyone to see. I know I was making a fool of myself. That is the kind of horrific things that happen to Indigenous children while attending these schools. The Canadian government has acknowledged the abuse through settlements and compensation programs for survivors, including Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement, which aims to address the harms that are done. Efforts to uncover the full extent of abuse continue, with ongoing investigations to find unmarked graves and former residential school sites, as many children who died or went missing were never returned to their families. These cases represent a small fraction of the widespread trauma experienced by Indigenous children at residential schools across Canada. The legacy of these abuses continues to affect Indigenous communities, and ongoing efforts for justice, healing, and reconciliation are crucial. With the fourth question, if I haven't been to residential schools or day schools, has any of my family members? If so, what are some stories that have stuck up to me? My great-grandma on my father's side went to residential schools with her siblings. Her and her siblings escaped the residential schools in northern BC. I don't know which one exactly. Running in the snow, hiding, not getting shot, and basically starving for weeks till they could find refuge, and then hid so they wouldn't be taken back. That's my story, my history, and I want to help rewrite it. Next, we'll have my mother speaking, who was adopted in the Gitxsan clan and grew up in Kispiox, the Res, for most of her life, and saw how Indigenous people were treated from the outside in.
A lot of it is created, like, on the reservations, which is, like, really, really sad.
Like the violence is created there?
Yeah. By hurting people, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was never really part of like Witset or anything like that. A lot more girls down that way went missing a lot more. But we were told, like, don't ever go to, like, don't ever get a ride with the guy in the yellow car. We're always told never to get a ride with the guy with the yellow car.
Did anyone figure out who the guy in the yellow car was?
Well, they like my parents, everybody knew. They knew kind of the story, and then what I heard, like, later on is one of the grandkids was at the house, and the door was locked, but he wasn't home. Like, the door to the basement was locked, and they got through the lock, and they found, like, a bunch of women's purses and underwear, licenses, and wallets of, like, women that had gone missing. So it was, like, a big investigation. And that was more recent. That was, like, after I left high school, that raid happened.
And like, how was that dealt with? Or like, how would you want that to be different? Like, did he get jail time? Did he get not jail time?
I don't know the whole story about that. That guy lived in Alton. And then my girlfriend's grandfather out of Kiunga, back road again, white man. The FBI followed him for a long time, and they raided his house. I don't know what happened to him after that. I don't know if he, like, killed himself or if he went to jail. And supposedly he was tied into the Highway of Tears too.
Was there anything that you wish was like different?
Well, big time. There needs to be more like counseling services up there. There needs to be more things for the youth, more help for the youth up there. Big time, especially the native kids. Just a community feel, somewhere where they can learn how to like cook and can and preserve and garden and art, and just a space where they feel heard and wanted. I think that's a big thing lacking because of the addiction problem. It's in every single home. It's in the white homes. It's in the native homes. It's in East Indian homes. It's in every home up there, right? There's such addiction problems that those kids aren't getting like the love and affection. Like, yeah, their parents put them in hockey. They pay all this money for all these sports for them to be in. But at the end of the day, are they present? A lot of them aren't present.
I'm trying to skip to like the third question. It's like, how do you think Indigenous violence affects Indigenous people as a whole? Like, whether it's Indigenous violence between themselves or down here, the racism,
the division. Oh, that's just a thing too. Like it's kind of like pointing a finger at one race, but it's evidence in every race. It's being talked about more now than it ever was before. Before it was always pushed under the rugs, and again, it's just with the right start, so many families would flourish, and people would flourish without like the violence, without the alcoholism, without the trauma and stuff.
And like how like it is in the home, like especially with like alcoholism, a lot of the time parents can be violent and can like do things and allow things that shouldn't be happening.
Yeah. Well, like Kispiox had one of the highest incest rates in all of Canada. Like that's pretty hardcore. When I was little, that's what it was like. Right? And one day on the school bus, as we were driving by to go to school, we were on the res, and we were stopped at a bus stop, and we got to, so like here's the gas bar, there's the main road, that's the crossroad to go to the gas bar, that's the one that goes up to Grandma and Grandpa's old place. There are real big ditches, right, on each side of the road, and as the bus driver pulled up to the stop sign, he happened to look down and found a little boy with his pants around his ankles in the ditch. And we all had to see that. He obviously stopped the bus and got help for him right away. Yeah. And he was like drugged like a little boy, like a 10-year-old little boy that I went to school with. I don't remember his real name, but everybody called him Mowgli because he was just so homely. But again, that's how he was raised in his house, right? Why would a 10-year-old boy be out there in a ditch by himself at 7:30 in the morning?
Do you think that indigenous violence is connected to residential schools, or do you think that when they close the doors to
Oh,
the school, they end up
100%.
becoming sad? Do you think it's
No, it's never.
continuing?
It hasn't stopped because these people haven't got the proper tools to heal, right? Like your generation that's coming up is now stopping these generational curses and trauma, but it's still there. But at least your generation is working on it, whereas prior generations masked it, masked the pain with drugs, alcohol, because it was just much easier to do, right? It's a lot easier to hide in a bottle than it is to actually feel the feelings. So I think with your guys' generation coming up, there's going to be, and even mine, right? Like mine, I can see it in the mothers that are still living on the reservations there. I can see them healing and healing their kids and their prior generations and the ones that are all going to come. So it's starting. But for sure, it was like their people were so peaceful, like so connected to the land, so connected to Mother Earth, so connected to the Father Sky, like everything. They were so connected to God. And alcoholism and trauma and everything took that all away from them. They were such a peaceful people. They had their own rules, they had their own laws, and people obeyed them. When somebody did something really bad or wrong, which didn't happen very often, but when they did, the community would, or like the village would like surround that person in love instead of like shaming them and making them feel worthless and stuff, right? And I think that's what's like it's coming back more to. Not necessarily like Christianity. Christianity stole everything from everybody. But just coming back to God and their creator and their roots. They were good people. They were generous people. They were hardworking people. They were kind. They were warriors, but also lovers in the same way. Like the women were held in such high regard. The men would honor their women. They would hunt. They would feed their communities, not just the family, but they would feed communities. Right? Like it was so different. But when you hurt so many people in one single race, and it happened to lots of different races. It's not just
every race.
But when you hurt so many people in one race and their laws, it completely changes and alters who is born 20 years from now. It lasts up to like 7 years or something. Like, well, it can last forever, but the side effects, like the cortisol hits and stuff, are so damaging to your actual like DNA.
What's a residential school story that you heard while living on the res or off that stuck out to you, and why did it stick out to you?
The Queen one always has ever since I was a little girl.
Kamloops?
In Kamloops. Main one that like I heard lots of little stories from local people, right? About getting their hair cut off and beaten and raped and burnt. Lots of times they would burn them. Like, I don't know, with sticks or candles or like burn their skin, you know?
Like stamping almost.
Yeah, like just burn them all the time, like to hurt them and stuff. Switching I've heard of like that kind of stuff, but the one that stuck out, because I heard it in elementary school, and that was the Kamloops one.
What happened to the Kamloops?
Well, the little boy talked about it, and we heard it through elders telling the story to us. And how it was told to us was the queen was coming. And I've never really liked her, ever. I always liked Diana, but I always thought the queen just, like, felt evil, even as, like, a little tiny girl. My grandma loved her, but... So it really stuck out to me, because everybody loved and honored the queen and all this stuff. And then when this elder came into the school and, like, told us the story, it was just kind of like everything they said resonated and felt truthful to me, like, as a human being. So they had started off by saying, like, the queen came and they took, I don't know if it was 12 kids or 6 kids or something.
It was between 7 and 10 or something.
Yeah, they took a bunch of kids on a picnic, and he happened to be one of them. And I don't know what happened to him, or if he wandered off during this picnic. I don't know how he didn't get taken. By the grace of God, I don't know. I don't know what happened. But he ended up not getting taken. Like, he went on the picnic. He talked about, like, the way that they dressed and the way that they talked. Like, the Queen and Prince Charles were there. And how they just took the kids. And they never seen them again.
Yeah, there's pictures of them getting onto, I think it was a plane or something.
Like, never ever seen them again. And then what really stuck out was the fact that, like, I knew about these stories as a kid. And then when all this stuff starting to, like, come to light now, then I found out he was going to testify against them in court. Against, like, the residential schools and the Queen. Like, he was full on going to court. And he was down here at the time, and something happened to him. He ended up having to go to the hospital, St. Paul's Hospital, downtown Vancouver. And he didn't make it out of there. So he wasn't able to testify. They said there was complications that happened, and he passed.
So you think that there wasn't complications?
I absolutely do not think there was complications. I think
he was killed?
100% think he was killed, because it would have been like a week later he was supposed to testify in this trial against the Queen and Prince Charles.
So you think it had something to do with, like, the Queen or the government?
The Queen runs the government. Well, had run. The Crown had run the government.
So you think one of them did
Their
something?
blood, the native blood is just like the natives in other countries, right? Like Jamaica or Africa, or there's something really rich and pure about their blood that they like to harvest it. And I don't know why. And that's huge. That's still a huge, huge problem to this day, is the child trafficking and the harvesting of children. And the CPS is very much involved in that. And the police and the lawyers. So it's pretty tricky.
So you think CPS, like, will do things like that to Indigenous kids?
100%. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen wonderful parents have their kids taken away because of no reason.
Yeah, and don't, like, the police show up to your bedside when you have a Native kid?
Yes.
Try to take them?
Well, it's not a matter of, like...
Well, to see if you're, like, fit as a parent, and they have more of a chance
They
to
ask
take them.
really tricky questions. That's the thing. You just come out of labor of having a baby. And if you don't answer these questions exactly right, they can take your baby. And they will. And they have. And they've done it to a lot of people. Like an awful
So,
lot
like,
of
if you're on drugs or something, you answer the question wrong.
Oh, if you're on drugs, like, you probably won't even get a chance to hold that kid if you're a native.
Well, no, I mean, like you know, the drugs that they give you in
Oh, like,
Madrid.
yeah. No. I never was, but it's...
Like, let's say, like a mom needs, like, one
like
of those
if she had
needles
morphine,
or,
or if she had any kind of pain medicine, then yeah, like your might not be as coherent, or your judgment might be fuzzy, for sure. But they do show up, a full uniform cop with a gun and everything at your bedside.
That's scary.
And it's happened, the only time it didn't happen was when I was up north.
So for my birth?
For your birth, that was the only time it didn't happen.
But for the boys it did?
All 3 of them, yeah. They had cops. two of them, come to the bedside as soon as your dad would leave and start asking me all these questions about my mental health and if I was fit to be a parent and all this stuff.
That's crazy. How has racism changed towards indigenous people over time? Is it better or worse? And how did you see indigenous people get treated as a kid compared to now? And how your kids are treated and when did that shift happen?
So when I was younger, especially growing up in kind of a smaller community with, I would say, more loggers, you definitely heard a lot of racist comments. But it was a lot of these men that there was no follow through. They never I would never they would always be at the bars together. You know what I mean? They'd always be hanging out with one another. And there was always racist comments, but there was always racist comments back at the white people, and they were some of them were kind of friends. It was weird. Do you know what I mean? They would throw racist slurs at each other, and it'd be ha 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 ha, and they'd still friends at the end of the day. There was a lot of racist slurs that were thrown around a lot when I was younger. And then in my teenage years, it started to become more taboo to do that. You know what I mean? Yeah, a lot more people weren't, my generation, I guess it was, weren't racist to each other's friends, right? Obviously I could call them Umshua all the time. I didn't take it as them being racist to me, right? And I would call them Indians. And that wasn't racist to them. You know what I mean? And then I would say the shift, and then down here, ignorance, complete ignorance when I first moved down here, and still as when you guys were younger, still a lot of ignorance, but more curiosity. I've seen a lot more curiosity from schools, especially. Every single school that I ever put you guys in, they were super interested in your guys' culture. They were super interested in everything I had learned. And every, whether it was New Westminster or Coquitlam, and then here, I've always been asked to, share food, share stories, share artwork, and I've always been very, very willing in every single class that I've ever attended, whether it's teaching kids art or traditional food, music, drumming. I've always had such a good encounter with kids here, honestly. Right through the mainland, right through Connaught, right through Hampton Park. All the kids, nobody made fun of me. Nobody ever laughed. They always asked questions. They were always really curious, and really awed almost by some of the stories. I think they really the connection that that culture will bring to you when it comes to Mother Earth or Father Sky. It just brings you such a connection, and I think people feel that as soon as they open up their mind and their heart to learning it, right? So I've seen a lot more curiosity over the years, and then we've seen this kind of shift too when the natives really started standing up for themselves, for their laws, for their land, right? With whether it be the pipeline, them seriously burning everything down for the pipeline. Then you've seen another shift, right? And that's that shift to division. And a lot of people fell into the ploy of division, right? Tons of people fell into it. I had friends I lost over it, right? Saying that my friends who are standing on the train tracks deserve to die. No, they never ever deserve to die.
No one deserves that.
No, and they were making the problem heard and seen and change. That's how a little bit of change happened. So I seen a big pocket of racism happen during that time, and a lot of division, especially in my community back home. So much division, which is so sad. Now I'm starting to see that community come more together, and I think that's what it's like in a lot more smaller communities, is that they're learning that the government's a piece of shit and lied to them. They're learning that they are sovereign beings of this land. They never fell under the codes of the government of Canada, ever. They are literally sovereign beings of this land. And I think a lot of them are realizing the power that they do have. and not dividing, right? Like they're not dividing, they're bringing people together. They're not saying like, oh, these white people need to be kicked off their land because they're living on our land for the last 150 years. Like, they're not saying that. They're like, let's come together and be a community. Let's work together. Let's feed our families together. Let's learn how to like hunt and do all these things. So I think we're headed in a right direction, especially because, like I said, in your generation, people are really healing. And when you have healing, you don't have division because you've got no more ego anymore, right? Once you have that healing done, that ego, that pain, that victim mentality is gone. Once that victim mentality is gone, and not saying like forgive and forget, like that's not how it works. But they need to forgive themselves for the seasons where they were still learning, you know? Like they say, like as a woman, we change 90 to 100 times before our lifetime. And we got to give grace to every single one of those women, right? They say like to feed every single one of those little girls that went through the change, and then your teenage and your womanhood and motherhood. Like these are all huge changes in our lives. And when we grace those lives inside of us, those little girls with milk and honey, and we honor them and we love them, that's how we can create healing for generations to come. And I think it's really like you guys, your era, that's really starting the process. They're getting it, right? They're not wanting the division. And again, like some in my generation, not all, but some in my generation are really starting to do that healing, and then you don't see that division. And when there's no division, that's how they bring people together. That's how they get other cultures interested, right? That's how they have stories told. It's been pretty shitty for them from Canada, and that's the government. It's a huge part in that.
So like when you were up north, it was more just like jokes, and then when you came down here, it was just ignorance. Like how did you see like dad getting treated, or like us as kids? Because I remember in Coquitlam even there was like some ignorance, especially with those neighbors they had.
For sure. Like we definitely seen.
People not understanding and not wanting to understand.
Oh, that's just it. Not wanting to understand.
So it was like the ignorance, and then it moved more into like curiosity.
Well, yeah, and here, like when I moved here, it was a little bit more. I would say like more in your face, and I would hear of the abuse, or like when I walked down on Hastings, I would see more of how these people were like living, and some of them are people like I grew up with down on Hastings. You know, these are my friends' family members. Some of these people that are.
How did that feel?
It's just it was really sad seeing some of those people down there, right? Because they're just so lost, and once in a while somebody would recognize me, right? And chit chat for a minute. They always loved you kids a lot. And what I noticed is like the native people really were always like drawn. I don't know why. But like drawn to you guys as kids, especially. Like they'd always be like, "Oh, they're so cute," and I don't know if it's like olive skin or what.
Probably seen someone that like look like them.
But I've seen like at the like downtown Vancouver, I definitely seen violence.
Like when you moved here?
Yeah, when I moved here. Like
when about did you move here? Like 20 years ago?
Yeah, would have been. Oh golly. 2001.
Okay, so like 2001, it was like still very racist and ignorance, and then.
I would say so, yeah. Like it was like. Yeah.
And when about did you see that shift from ignorance to curiosity, and then to.
I would say more when you guys were probably around like 2007.
So now it's fun.
Yeah, I started seeing like a little bit more artwork. That was the biggest thing that I started recognizing. More artwork on buildings, more artwork, more of the native artwork being sold in little gift shops. And
so like embracing the culture.
Well, yeah, and like you'd start to see it in some clothing, right? 2010, people started feeling more confident in themselves, in their culture, in their music, in their voices, in their language. I think we started to see more of like a flourish. And then that's when, instead of, you hear the racist comments, and then the natives would just throw the racist comments back, right? Like, fire with fire, fire with fire. But now we're not seeing that. We're seeing people being fought with fire and coming with grace, right? So when you come with grace, you put out that fire instantly. And that's what sparks curiosity. That's what sparks listening ears, right? And all it takes is just one person saying a couple words that can like actually change somebody's mind. Like, oh, maybe I should go research this, right? Instead of just listening to what I've heard on the news or what I've seen online. Like, there is a lot of history people can research that they don't know about, like the unceded lands and everything else. The division that our governments have caused in so many races is sickening.
So you see that shift from curiosity to like healing?
I would say when like COVID happened, when people had the time to finally sit down and have to feel their feelings, because they had no choice. They couldn't go to work, they couldn't go to school, they couldn't go to practices, they couldn't even walk outside on the freaking walkway, you know what I mean? So I think that, and I think people really started researching too. So I think we're seeing a huge shift now in people coming together.
Do you think that's like now?
I think it's now. But when you keep passing that pebble of kindness down, it's just going to keep creating a ripple effect amongst all the people around you. Like, you might have only affect one person, but that one person's going to then go affect the other person. And they say all it takes is watching something good happen for your own body to feel those same, like, let's say you go give an old lady a flower that you just picked and you made her day, right? She's radiating with smile and super happy. And let's say like a neighbor down the road happened to see this happen. That neighbor down the road is going to get the same dopamine hit that you're getting, that the old lady's getting, just by witnessing it, right? So the more we create that, the more ripple effects we're going to have, and the more healing and the more time people are going to have to just spend with each other. I think people are starting to realize humans are more important than money or fame or things. We can't bring any of that to the grave with us. Just having faith in your people, in your abilities, in your voices, in your singing. Like, they used to have to hide, right, to sing or drum. And now you hear it downtown Vancouver. You hear it on the beaches. You hear it online all the time now. You see all these powwows happening. And I love the powwows that welcome everybody, man. That's what's gonna bring power to so many people, is in letting everybody, because that's what it used to be like. They never were divided. They never were racist.
And we shared. Mm-hmm. That's why I say, like, indigenous culture is Canadian culture. It doesn't matter which race or color.
Like, look at my family, for instance. 100 years ago. Because, yeah, it'd be like 180 years ago. Oh, no, I guess I'm getting kind of old, so I'd be closer to 100 years ago. My great-great-grandparents used to trade mink fur with the village people in exchange for fish. My parents didn't have mink farm, right? So before they moved, they would, provide all the potatoes, most of the vegetables for almost all the feasts that happened in the village. And there was quite a few families that they would trade some fish for some potatoes and stuff. Usually it was hooks, so like dried salmon, and it was gifted to them, and they would gift the vegetables back.
Anything you want to like share?
I think just the culture is very important for like all of us to learn, but it's also really important for us to learn like other people's cultures and other people's foods. Like I think that's how we're gonna come together a lot more. It's just sharing and having the ability to accept things that might feel weird or might feel like, oh, this feels kind of awkward, or but I think by feeling those things, it's gonna create a pretty cool space for like your kids' generation to grow up in, and a lot safer, right? Because right now it's still not really safe for Native people. It's not. It's I don't know how much down here, but like, look what happened to Matt when we lent him our truck, right? And like, look what's happened to your dad too, and it's just his skin color. Keep your mouth shut around the cops because I'm lippy, and I don't know how to keep my mouth shut sometimes because I always stand up what's right. And he's always been scared of that, like he's gonna get billy clubbed because of my big mouth, and always trying to stand up. I just hope that that changes. Because I don't want to say it's like just police, it's just this, it's just that. That's where it needs to change.
And how do you think we could change it? Like how could, like not just like putting the blame on cops, but like for example,
What
cops.
really needs to change is we need to go back to a common law system. And every single judge, every single police officer, every single medical attendant, doctor, teacher, psychologist, everybody needs to be retrained. Every single one needs to be retrained. Because they're not doing it right. They're not. They need to go back to a different system. And there needs to be real change in how these police officers, how the lawyers are taught, the bar needs to change, right? The legalese, how they speak to trick people, like needs to change, right? Those things all need to change. I don't know how that's gonna happen, but I really, really hope like your guys' generation just keeps being loud to make those changes happen, right? It's like the racism's everywhere. Try to change the minds of those shit people to not that victim mentality, then you're gonna see a big shift too. And that's why I think like counselors being retrained to really help people through those big feelings, I think would create a lot of change.
Do you think this generation has like the ability to do that?
I do, with the help of some really awesome like older folks. Yeah, I do. I really, really do. I truly believe that.
Do you think it'll be better for our kids?
Oh, 100%. I believe that. I believe it's going to be 1,000 years of peace. And I truly believe that. I 100% do. It's just, that's the thing. Nobody got mad enough before my generation. Nobody got angry enough. Nobody wanted to stand up because it felt uncomfortable. Or it might make your stomach feel really, really, really flip-floppy to stand up and speak those words. Or when you see something wrong, stand up, say something, do something. I think a lot of people are really, really scared to do that. And I really don't think your generation is. I think, like, of course, like, every generation has their little fuck-ups and, you know, not so great quirks. And there's some stuff, right, in your guys' generation that's like, yeah, you guys might need to work on this a little bit. But the one thing that you guys have is you're passionate. You're really passionate, especially about something you believe in. And I truly believe a lot of you kids that came were meant to come to change these generations. before that came before you and the ones that came after. Like, I truly believe that a lot of you guys came for a reason.
That's how I always thought stand up.
Yes. Or do the right thing, or if you see somebody getting hurt or bullied, to always stand up, even if it costs you your life, right? I've always taught you guys that ever since you were little.
Did you see that in all of us?
I do. I see the boys as soft. I've raised very soft, emotional boys. I'm proud of that, though, because like, they're gonna take care of their women, and I know that. I know that, and they're embracing their culture. They're proud of it, whereas their dad wasn't proud of it. He was very embarrassed. They were embarrassed of who they were and where they came from. There's a lot of the times he would say shh when I was singing Gitsan and stuff. And it wasn't until an elder recognized me at his grandmother's house and spoke to me in Gitsan, and I spoke back to him in Gitsan. And oh, you little white girl. And that was like the first time I really felt your dad feel proud of me and what I've learned over the years. Because not many women could have walked in that room and done that. Like, you're seeing the word being spoke more, the language being spoke more now, but it wasn't. Like, I learned Gitsan, but there was really not many families speaking it fluently anymore. Some of the grannies and grandpas definitely were speaking it fluent, but it wasn't very often. Now it's so beautiful to see how many young kids can literally read speeches and get that. It's incredible. It's such a hard language to learn. And they're being able to now pass that down. Like, I would say when I was young, like, me and Elizabeth Doler used to get the Gitsan Awards. The two white kids in the whole school would get the Gitsan Awards for speaking Gitsan. And now, like, I would say, like, fluently, when I was younger, there might have been maybe 20 people, let's say, 20 people, 30 people that spoke it fluently, right? Now, I would say there's hundreds, right? I'm seeing little tiny kids, their parents, their grannies, their aunties and uncles all talking together. It's so beautiful. Like, it's such a beautiful thing to witness. It really, really is. It really is. I think you guys are gonna create some changes in a positive way because you're able to, like, set that ego aside and put yourself in other people's shoes and perspectives, right? I think that's where a lot of people, especially older people who are caught in their ways, are really hard to get them to, like, think differently, you know? I think that's why we're going to see more change in the next 10 years than what we've ever seen in the last 100. And it's going to be positive. I know it's going to be a positive thing.
How do you feel about, like, me and what I do, and, like, what I've done?
It's pretty cool, and I think you could go pretty far with your voice. And the fact that whose granddaughter you were and whose great-granddaughter you are, and the fact that you carry one of their names, it doesn't just happen by accident. And the oldest one, the oldest firstborn, or your firstborn kid, is literally the catalyst of our whole family. So, like, the firstborn child is like the maker or the breaker of the family, right? So you could either take your knowledge, take your wisdom, take your beautiful culture and do good with it, or you could not, right? And that would ultimately make or break your brothers and your mother and father. So that's why the firstborn, especially in the native culture, is so important. Doesn't matter if you're girl or boy, it's that firstborn that's going to be teaching the younger ones. And it's that firstborn that's going to be carrying the mother and father too, right? Because it's all a circle. We start out changing your diapers, so what's going to happen when we get old, right? So if you're one of those kids that are super disconnected from your culture, and your family, what's going to happen to your parents? You're going to be left in a old folks home to be beaten and treated really badly, and, you know, or are they going to be at home where they're meant to be with their kids and their family, being taken care of? That's why you see, too, especially like the native cultures, the East Indians, and the Chinese. They all look after their family. White people are the only ones that throw their freaking parents in an old folks home because they're too busy. They don't have the time. It's not important, right? They'd rather pay the money than have to do the work for their parents. Their parents put in all those years into them. So I think like what you've already done, I know it is. I know it always has been.
It's gonna make me freaking cry.
Well, like, even though we fought and everything, we might not get along very much. I've always told you these things, and I've always told you you're capable because I knew God wouldn't bring me. Like, yes, you've made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But God wouldn't have brought me you for nothing, right? Like, he already had me doing the work, making the changes, doing my karmic freaking, you know, filling my karmic duties and all this stuff. He already had one that was like there, and he brought me you so you could continue and finish that legacy that I can't finish, right? That's not the boy's job. I don't want to say it's like your job and it's not putting weight on your shoulders, but it's you represent your family and your brothers will follow. Like, do you know what I mean?
Did you notice that when I started speaking? Did they become more interested in it? Because I noticed Ryder definitely did.
Ryder definitely did, but I think that's too because he got to witness you at the school, right? The two younger boys haven't really got to watch you in that atmosphere before, but I think, especially Ryder, I think he gained a lot more respect for you just as a human as a whole, because again, you guys have had your little fights and stuff. I think as a whole, like as a human, he definitely has way more respect for you, and like definitely like that aspect, you know, like I know that any of my kids would give the shirt off their back, you know, and always do the right thing, kind of thing. So I know he sees that and he's proud of you too, right? Your little brothers just haven't had a chance to listen to you speak or hear you, or even hear mom or you sing and drum, you know. They haven't had that opportunity yet. That hit your dad in the soul too, you know. You could hear him crying on his phone while he's freaking recording it, because he's never had that connection to his culture. That's the thing, you bring connection. You bring that missing puzzle piece that's like missing, you know? Like, people can be at a big venue listening to all this shit, and they're listening, but it's your voice that creates that connection. Like, you get that, right? And that's why I've always said that. I've always told you you're special and gifted in a way that I didn't know, but I knew. Something was, you were sent for a reason. You have a purpose, and it's to help your people heal in their generation so they can heal their past and their future forever, right? That's why you were put here. I truly believe that. I think maybe it might have taken you a little too long to get the confidence in yourself to do it, but I'm glad you did. Because if you would have left high school, I don't think you would have started it outside of high school.
I don't think so.
No, so I'm glad you finally got the courage to just do it and not be afraid of what anybody thought, and you just did it. Because it's now really, I think, like, even the racism in your school in the last 3 years has gotten better. Just because there's more awareness of, like, the cultures or what happened at residential schools, you know, the trauma that was actually created. People say, oh, residential schools, they have no idea.
No idea.
They have no idea, like, whatsoever of what these people had to listen to endure. Like, They would rape them and then burn their babies. Like, it was awful, awful. Like, those are things that, how can you recover from that? Like, we can't, as people nowadays, even put ourselves in those shoes. Because our bodies would be so traumatized, they would fucking die. They would die. Like, it would literally kill us. The pain and the suffering would literally kill us. And these people didn't die. These people kept going and going and going. And they might have caused a little more trauma and a little more shit throughout the years and their children. But they were always trying their best. Right?
I think also, like, the continuing, like, allowed, like, especially kids in my generation, like, my generation, like, I know a lot of Native people that didn't want to speak, saw me speak, and then realized that they had that voice. And they've been through that. Seeing, like, other people's mistakes, especially of, like, older generations, you see their mistakes and you know what you can do to be better. You know what I mean? And you promise yourself, I'm never going to do that.
Well, like, even if you promise yourself you're never going to do that, and if you slip up, it's just a matter of...
Are you going to stay there?
Doing better tomorrow. Right? Like, do better today than you did yesterday. That's kind of always the rule of thumb. You know, if it was a bad day, especially when you guys were little, there's hard days that were hard. Maybe I wasn't the best mom. But I'd always tell myself, I'm here, I'm present, and I'll do better tomorrow than I did today. And that's all we can do as people, is just try to be better and do better and be kind. And I think by showing, like, grace and kindness is just going to create more and more ripples. Especially, like, speaking, right? Because when you speak and you speak with kindness but authority in your heart, people listen.
I noticed that too.
Right? Like, and especially when you're, like, knowledgeable, when you actually, like, know, like, your facts and you're knowledgeable, I think that really helps people too. Because then they're not questioning, like, oh, did she just learn it off Google? It's like, no. It's not how it is, right? Some people like giving you the time, and yeah, I think it's a good thing. I think a lot more youth are gonna be coming out, speaking more, and it's not a matter of pointing the fingers. It's a matter of owning our own stuff and then meeting other people with grace. Like, owning our own mistakes, owning our own past, or generational trauma, owning that, feeling it, and moving forward. Because, like living in the victim mentalities doesn't get anybody anywhere. And if you were living in that victim mentality, there's no way that you could help other people. So I think your guys' generation's gonna do good. I think so. I think there's gonna be real change.
Thank you for letting me interview you.
You're welcome.